So now we are going to play with the NextAuth and Auth0 because we already have created a NextAuth options. We have a simple button which says a login with Auth0, and let's see how it works. So inside a page.tsx, so I also enabled a debugging because we are doing it for the first time. So if there is any error, we should be able to get it. So this is a simple button inside page.tsx. You can see continue with Auth0, and that is calling sign in, and Auth0 is the provider, right? And callback URL is / and sign in, and I'm passing this argument that tells NextAuth, okay, use the Auth0 provider for the login. So I'm doing login. It is prompting me this screen for the login. Sometimes it is getting timeout, that I have seen, but if your user exists on the Auth0 user management, you can use username password. Otherwise you can use a Google. You can use Google to get authentication. And are we getting something? We can check that session is initialized. We got some data. Okay, we are not printing any information. So what we can do is we can just check if a user really logged in. So that we can do by using these simple components. So inside auth.ts, these auth providers, and then here we have access token, ID token, and both these callbacks. Inside page.tsx, we are actually using some additional components to see the server side session what it contains and the client side session what it contains. So I explicitly created these simple components, and here we can see this is a sign in button, register button, and sign out button. So sign in button is doing a sign in with the Auth0, and this is the client side session because we are using use session hook. In the use client side components are identified by the top line use client, and inside a client side component you can use a use session to get the session. So if session exists, we can just print that using json.stringify. And here I'm doing nothing. I did a login. There are some buttons like a login, logout, login, sign up, and log out. And this is, you can see, authenticated true. This is a auth session API. So in the NextAuth, Next.js APIs, we also have written a session API. Inside a session folder, there is a route.ts that gives us the session information, right? So this is a user information, and there is ID token in the bottom, ID token and access token. And I do a sign out, and now session is empty because there is nothing. So I can do the sign in with Auth0. This is nothing but a simple page we have on the page.tsx that is just printing the session, server side session and the client side session. So here you can see what do we have is we have a NextAuth provider and session provider wrapped with this. Inside a layout we are using NextAuth provider, and inside that NextAuth provider we can access the auth session. And here you can see I have these buttons. Okay, server side session, because this is a server component, this page.tsx, so I can access the server side session using get server side session, and I'm just doing a json.stringify. In this server component, I'm rendering a client side component, user component. There I'm just using a use session hook to get the current session using user component, and here I'm printing the client side session. So this is pretty much simple, right? And this is how we are populating the ID token and access token, and that we should be able to fetch inside a token. So if you try to see your session, what it contains, this is all session information. Currently both the session null, client side and server side. I will do the sign in with the Auth0. We'll try to log in. It will give me the prompt, and I can just use the username password or sign in with the Google. That will initialize my session, and I will be able to see my session information, either the client side session or the server side session. It contains just a simple key value properties. It's just a JSON object, and in the API session also will give you the session user object inside session whatever you have put, because internally to identify the session we are going to call API session. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we already have integrated Auth0 as a provider in the NextAuth, and then now we already have APIs. That APIs are going to use this session to identify, okay, that session does exist, you already got access token from the APIs or not. Okay, because the APIs we are going to write in the Next.js, and we already have a get server side session access in those API routes, and we can get the access token there. So this is like the end goal what we are trying to achieve from the Next.js. Server side APIs will access the data, and then we will pass the access authorization bearer token inside Axios request. So this is the same structure from the Auth0. We initialize the session. Server side session will have an access token, and now Next.js API routes will call the external services by accessing this server side session and getting the access token from there. Okay, this is a pretty much overall story.